Well, hello everyone. Looks like Kim, who's supposed to be our host today, her internet connection just froze. So, my name is Paul Engel with Conversations on the Culture. Kim, have we got you back? It doesn't look like it. Oh boy, it's going to be a fun one today. While Kim tries to work out her technical issues, we are here with Darryl Rodgers, a keynote speaker, author, and parent-teen coach who lives in Cary, North Carolina. We'll have to talk to him about that at some point. He's the son of a Southern Baptist preacher. He grew up in rural South Carolina, hunting, fishing, and playing in the woods near his home. Sounds like a lot of fun. At the age of 19, Darryl began a career as a corporate pilot. He served as a medic in the Army National Guard and later became a co-pilot gunner of an AH-64 Apache helicopter. He's owned several small businesses and had most fun running an outdoor summer day camp for boys. Darryl's been married to his wife, Kim, for 29 years. They are the proud parents of two boys, Justin and Chase. The oldest son, Chase, was killed in a tragic car wreck in 2014. I'm sorry to hear that, Darryl. It says you wrote about your son, Chase, in your first book, a life author of Taking, a book about spiritual warfare. Darryl, it sounds like you've had a very interesting life so far.
It's been interesting to say the least.
Kim, are you with us now? No, now we don't have Kim's audio. Okay. So, well, again, Kim, you may want to drop out and try reconnecting, but why don't we start out, Darryl? There's a lot going on. There's actually a lot that I'd love to talk to you about, but let's start out with the story of your son, Chase. It sounds like a tragedy that I'm hoping had some silver lining to it.
Okay. Chase was a good kid growing up. He was diagnosed ADHD, ADD early on, and his case compared to most kids I've seen was a pretty mild case. He just had some issues with mostly just attention in the classroom. He would lose focus a little bit, but I mean, and sometimes he could be hyperactive. At times he could be just impulsive, I guess I would say. But that would come and go, and it was nothing real serious. Chase was easygoing, quiet. All of his friends would tell you that. Everybody loved Chase because he would do anything for you. He was kind of funny, had a weird sense of humor, kept his friends laughing, and so he had a lot of friends. He was good at every sport that he ever played. And I think that had a lot to do with the way he was wired up. Being ADHD, he was really quick. He was small for an athlete, but he was really quick, had really good hand-eye coordination, very agile. And so he played a lot of sports. And as he got older, he left all of the other sports behind to focus on football. And he was especially small for a football player, but he played defensive back mostly. He did become an Eagle Scout eventually. He was really in about the 10th grade that we began to have some issues with Chase, where for the first time, he was never a stellar student, but he was above average. And for the first time, his grades were beginning to drop. And he was beginning to become rebellious at home. And I caught him in some lies, and he had never lied before. In fact, he would be honest to the point that it would get him in, even if he knew it would get him in trouble. So it was really out of character for him to tell us lies. And so we, eventually things progressed to the point where he'd never really been in any kind of trouble, but I felt like things were heading in a bad direction. I have a military background, as you heard earlier, and so I felt like that maybe a military school would be a good fit for him. I felt like the structured environment and the discipline would be good. And so, middle of his his sophomore year. Well, actually, it was middle of his junior year. He transferred to a military school in Virginia, and he graduated. He brought his grades up. He graduated and was doing a lot better. Seemed like things were heading in a good direction. He had a really good season, his football season, his senior year, and there were a few football scouts, college scouts that were interested in him, and he ended up accepting an offer to go play at a small school in Illinois. Unfortunately, when he got there is when he began to, he may have been using earlier, but we don't really know. But that's when he really fell off, the wheels kind of fell off, where he began to experiment a lot with drugs and alcohol. It was really about the group that he was associating with. And he dropped out early on in his second semester of his freshman year. He came back home, gravitated to a rough crowd at home, and he ended up in, we held an intervention for him here in our home, just because he was getting really scary looking, lost a lot of weight, was pale. We got him into treatment. He was in treatment for 30 days. He spent a total of about 9 months in Florida. And then he came back, was doing better, but over a period of time began to relapse. And he came to me and told me, that he said, "Dad, I'm hanging around a bad crowd again. I'm headed in a bad direction. I need to get away from these kids. I need to get away from these people." And really, he didn't know how to cut ties other than to move. And so he had taken a job transfer to Florida, back to the area where he had been in treatment. And so the day that he was supposed to leave, he promised us he would come by and have a meal with us before leaving. And the day he was supposed to leave, we had not heard anything from him. My wife, Kim, was getting upset, thinking that Chase had left without saying goodbye. And it was getting late in the afternoon. So we tried to call him and text him, no response. And eventually I took a phone call from a friend. I was out in the front lawn. It was a nice day out, May the 29th, 2014. And I was out on the front lawn talking to my friend on the cell phone when a police cruiser pulled up to the curb in front of our house. And the officer was coming. I met him in the driveway. He was coming to tell me that Chase had been killed in a wreck. And apparently, based on everything that I know, they had been to a park near our home. Chase and some of his friends smoked some marijuana there together. And then Chase gave his car keys to this young lady. And he had dated her at one time. She was a really pretty girl. He let her get in the driver's seat of his car. He got in the front passenger seat of his own car. And then another young man climbed into the back. They left Cary, drove right out into rush hour traffic on 440, and she lost control of his car in a curve. Left the road, struck a tree, and Chase was killed instantly. It took firefighters about an hour to get them out of the vehicle, and then they recovered the other two to the extent that they could come home to continue their recovery there. But then 7 months after the wreck, just a few weeks prior to what would have been her first court appearance, she died following a fire that broke out in her apartment. And the fire chief, based on their investigation, they believed that she poured gasoline all over the floor, stood in the middle of it, and ignited it. They found two suicide notes. So that's kind of the story in a nutshell. It's a really tragic story. I wish I could go back in time and change all of that, but I can't. So I've just had to figure out how to live with it, and one day at a time, and try to use the story to help others.
Yeah, that sounds, I've heard you hear stories similar to that. And like you said, you don't know what to do. You don't know how to react. It's terrible. But so, you've dealt with this issue of teens and substance abuse. Can you tell me, from your experience and what, can you tell me, where's a lot of this coming from? I mean, we've always had drugs of some sort. Where is all this coming from? What's the problem we're dealing with our teens and young adults?
Well, it's in a lot of ways, it's sort of a complex problem because there's so many different factors involved. And every teenager is different, and there are different things affecting them. But, really, what I've seen over the course of my lifetime is I've seen really the family unit dissolve. It's not like it used to be. And there are a lot of single moms out there who are struggling and working hard and doing the best they can, but it's really difficult to, and it's not always single moms, sometimes single dads too, but just really struggling to do everything they need to do. And a lot of kids that I talk to, a lot of teenagers that I talk to, I hear a lot of anger from them over the fact that there's no father in their life at all. If they even know who he is, they just don't have a relationship, or they don't have a good, healthy relationship with their dad. So that's part of it. There's just a lot of dysfunction in the home. Outside of that, of course, all of this goes back to really it's all about morals. It's all about spiritual upbringing, there's a spiritual component to this. And really, that's really the whole crux of it when you get right down to it. So I've tried to figure out, I can't, when I go into public schools and speak, I can't come out with an overtly Christian message for the most part. So I've tried to figure out what are some of the other things that teenagers are struggling with, and or how can I reach them? What are some of the principles I can work with them on to help them the best way that I can? Obviously, where there's issues with parents, we can't. There's only so much we can do, but where we have the opportunity, I'm always open to trying to help parents do a better job with their raising their teenagers if they're struggling. But confidence is a big issue. That's one of the things that I've identified, and peer pressure. And when I ask teenagers, I get several answers. Why do teenagers sometimes abuse drugs and alcohol? And I get several key answers, but one of the main ones that I get is peer pressure. And what I've identified is that the main reason that anyone would cave into peer pressure is because of a lack of confidence. If you're confident enough, you don't care that much about what other people think, to the point that you're willing to engage in risky behavior, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And it matches up with some of the research I've seen about the power of peer pressure, not just at the teen and young adult, but even through our adulthood. So I guess if the issue is a lack of confidence, do you see a cause for that, or at least some correlation that would help understand? Well, would help us understand why these are growing up so susceptible, so lacking in confidence, and then maybe talk a bit about what the symptoms that parents can notice when to recognize in their own children.
Well, again, it has a spiritual component to it, in that they're lacking the spiritual foundations, now. And, every kid's different. Like Chase was raised in a very strong Christian home, but some of this is, I see it with some kids that I think there's a genetic component to it as well. Like some kids are just naturally more shy. So you really have to work with those kids to try to build their confidence. And as they mature, they'll gain more confidence. So Chase was more susceptible to peer pressure than his brother, for instance, because Chase was just more of a natural follower, whereas brother's more of a natural leader. So if you get a kid that's a little bit lacking confidence, he's more susceptible to the peer pressure. Let's see, I think we kind of got off topic a little bit there. If you can kind of bring me back, we were talking about the confidence. So if you want to build their confidence, I think first of all start with spiritual underpinnings. And you want to get them in church, but you want to teach them the Bible and just show them, live that by example every day. I think a lot of kids are very sensitive. So when parents are yelling, when parents get stressed out and they yell, they're doing damage there that they don't even realize. So I think a lot of it is speaking words of affirmation into a child's life, letting them know that they're loved. And there's so many different ways to do that. And it comes down to spending quality time. I spent a ton of time with Chase. But I think spending quality time, if you look at the 5 love languages, I don't know how many people are familiar with that, but I think that's a good measure because not every child is going to be responsive to quality time as much as they might be something else. For some, it's physical touch. It's giving them a big hug. For others, it's a pat on the back and saying, hey, great job. But I definitely think positive words, reinforcing. I think I'd like to see parents, and this I've had to learn this the hard way. Instead of focusing on the negative, focus more on the positive. In other words, praise more of the behavior that you want to see more of with your child.
It reminds you of the scripture verse, raise up a child in the way they should go.
Can you guys hear me? Paul,
hey, Kim. Yay, we hear you.
Hear me
okay,
yet?
This is
we'll do right. I'm here. Call me. I'm loving this conversation, Paul and Darryl. And I am trying to, when I read the Bible, that was close. And there was always activities, events. My parents were in and out of other members of Versa. So there was a lot of love, a lot of support, and played a very big role in addition to my regular family, my physical family. We had our issues but I found that my church family, looking back now, I didn't, but God really used them, intervene. And there were some situations, I think you all can relate to this, where what could have been wasn't because of the good, close, a perfect one. We know there's no such thing as that. There was a multitude. Comment on that. Can you share your thoughts on that?
I definitely think that makes a lot of sense to me. I grew up my dad was a Southern Baptist preacher, like I mentioned, and he pastored 3 different churches during my lifetime. There was the last church he stayed at for 15 years, I believe it was. And so I really grew up in that church, and I had a lot of strong connections with the people there. And it was a small church, so it was a close-knit community. And definitely there are life lessons that I learned from some of the other men there in the community. I'll never forget, man, I get choked up thinking about it a little bit, but there was this one gentleman that I really looked up to a lot that, I did a lot of hunting. I was raised in a hunting and fishing type, outdoorsman type culture. And I knew him from, we had hunted some together, but and he was a deacon in our church. And he did some farming, and he had me come out to his place one day, and I was a teenager trying to learn how to drive, and he let me drive his little pickup truck, and I didn't have the nerve to tell him, or didn't have the guts to tell him that I didn't know how to drive a stick shift. So he let me just make one mistake after another out in the field where it was safe until I could until I figured it out. By the end of the day, I knew how to drive a stick shift. He never said a word to me about it. And the whole time he was loading watermelons in the back of the truck. And he was picking out the right watermelons, loading in the back of the truck. Well, guess what we did with the watermelons? We went and visited all the sick and shut in and elderly people in the community and delivered those watermelons. And it didn't really make a big impression with me right at the moment, but years later, I'm going, wow, okay, I see what he was doing there, you know. So yeah, I think that culture, that close knit community, church community, I think it has a lot of impact, and I do see that missing a lot today.
Paul, your thoughts?
Well, there is a lot of community that's lost. I remember many decades ago as a child, there was an expectation that when you were out and about, it wasn't just your parents that were keeping an eye on you. Everybody kept an eye on you. There was and part of it was that community. I had, I had a loving family. I had lots of opportunities. And I think that the two things that, while raising my daughter, that I wanted to impart from her that I had learned was, well, one of them was, it's okay to not succeed. We sometimes say it's okay to fail. It's okay not to succeed, especially now when we can help catch you before you fall too hard. Try something. Don't be afraid to try something, because you'll never know what you'll find. You'll never know what you can do if you don't try. And I remember we homeschooled our daughter, and I remember the first year she went to a day camp, and it was only a few days in, and she came home, and you could just tell something was wrong. And we got her to talk to her. It's like, "What's the matter, honey?" What she said was, one of the girls there wanted her. She said she would be her friend if she did something she knew she wasn't supposed to. And I'm sure we've all had that experience of somebody that wants to take advantage of, especially someone in that situation. And I explained to her, I said, she doesn't want to be your friend. She wants to use you, and she wants to see what she can get you to do. That's not being a friend. That's not caring. Don't compromise.
Lady, huh?
Don't compromise for a false friendship, but be the person that Christ wants you to be. And I will never forget the last day of that camp, as my wife was picking up my daughter to go home for the last time. This girl who had tried to manipulate my daughter came running out because my daughter had forgotten her lunch bag, and she didn't want her to forget it. And the change that happens when a child in a situation they're not prepared to deal with gets loving support and as part of an ongoing scenario, it made a difference. I fully believe it made a difference in her willingness to go out and try things, and her willingness to say no to things that the society says we should be doing.
Testimony about your daughter, impression for an impact, I hope for good, for further. What I'm hearing from, I'd like to comment on this, Darryl and Paul, is just a lack of community. And we're not just talking, we're talking in the faith, if we can be candid. Maybe, and I'm evaluating myself and my people's lives as I should, guys.
You know, the substance abuse, we've called it the opioid crisis. I think it's much bigger than that. I see a substance abuse crisis, and it's not really being addressed in the churches overall like it should be. I'm sure there are people sitting in the pews every Sunday who have a drug problem. So there's sort of sometimes there's sort of a balancing act that has to go on there. In other words, I think, we have to be careful that we're not overly judgmental of those people. They feel judged, and so they feel judged, especially when they come to church. So they may be a little bit hypersensitive to that. And so it's real easy to, I think, for people to have the wrong attitude, and then these people maybe end up leaving the church when we had an opportunity to reach them. On the other end of the spectrum, sometimes I think that we're making too many excuses for people, to behave badly. So it's like, how far do we keep pushing the bar back? Sometimes we need to be willing to call sin, but we have to do it in a loving way. I think that's the key, is to make sure that people understand that they're loved and that we want to help them.
I use the example of, if you see someone driving 100 miles an hour towards a cliff, it's not loving to say, hey, enjoy yourself, have fun.
Right.
It's loving to say, you should stop what you're doing. And I think the faith-based community and our churches in the West as a whole have become much less concerned with well, I don't want to put that way. It seems like their focus is more on how many people are in the pews and how their programs are doing, and less the actual health of the neighbors. They want to have the pastor do all the work, or they want to have the youth leader do all the work, forgetting that it's those neighborly relationships that make all the difference. When one church I was in, I ran the soundboard, and I made a point of going around to all the teenagers. Of course, it helped that I taught the high school Sunday school class. But I said, if you want, come work with me on the soundboard. Learn something from this. Participate. Be involved. And it's in at least one young man's life, because for a while that was his career, was running audio video. He made a career out of it. But just the understanding that there was someone in his life besides his parents that he could talk to, that could have a relationship with him. And I remember on a couple of occasions when I've had brothers in Christ who needed correction, and we're tempted to, as you said, not be loving about it, to be higher than thou, and at least we didn't do that. And you're right, people react badly to that. But we also have to remember that it's not loving to watch somebody destroy themselves and not say something about it, or even worse, help them do it through our unwillingness to offend them. And I have seen on a couple of occasions lives make drastic turnaround, drastic improvements, because someone had the courage to lovingly say, what you're doing is not good, it's not healthy. I'm willing to help you if you really want help, but I'm not willing to help you if you want to continue. And that's it's not a quick and easy fix. It's not a 30-second soundbite from the pulpit. It's time, and it's effort, and it's work. And I don't think we're often taught that.
Boy, you guys, I agree. I've observed these things. The church may balance, and these are because I think all three of us here care about our country, care about its spiritual state and change, and then we can really impact our. Paul, could you close this out and start part 2?
Well, certainly. This has been. We have Kim Kennedy and Paul Engel here with Conversations on the Culture. We've been talking with Darryl Rodgers. We're going to split this into 2 episodes so you can easily take a break. We'll continue on in just a minute. Thank you very much.